Hey everyone, Alexander here for another installment of 30 Days of Symphony. Well, I hope you enjoyed as much as I did sharing the majesty of these amazing symphonic cycles of Beethoven and then of Brahms. Well, it's time to take a break from all that heavy Austro-German repertoire, and as the alphabet would demand, it's time for us to take a little detour to cross the English Channel and to celebrate the most, well, deservedly famous of the great symphonic works of England's greatest 20th century composer, the amazing composer of operas, vocal music, and indeed symphonic works. I think you all know by now, especially if you've ever sung in a choir, his choral works are also deservedly beloved. Of course, I'm talking about the great English composer Benjamin Britten and his most famous piece for orchestra, the 4 C Interludes, as he called them, from his first full-scale opera, Peter Grimes. You know, it's an amazing thought, actually, when you realize that the first full-scale operas, or full-fledged operas, by two of the very greatest opera composers of their respective eras, Richard Wagner and Benjamin Britten, both have as their principal character, as their principal theme, that of the sea. Now, some of you diehard Wagner fans out there will know that Wagner actually wrote 2 operas before he wrote the one I'm going to talk about, but they're not very important. Wagner's The Flying Dutchman and Benjamin Britten's Peter Grimes, both works that put these respective composers on the map in the musical world, are essentially stories about a doomed outcast of a man who comes from the sea and who wreaks kind of a havoc, becomes this destructive force in the life of an innocent fishing village on the North Sea coast, whether it be in England or in Scandinavia, and who is desperately searching, yearning for redemption through the love of an innocent young woman. Wagner, of course, told that tale in The Flying Dutchman, and for Benjamin Britten, it would be through Peter Grimes of 1944-45. Benjamin Britten was a composer I just worshipped like a hero in my adolescence. Britten and his lifelong partner, the great English tenor, Sir Peter Pears. I idolized these men, and actually it was through performing a lot of their music in college that I actually was able to luck out and get myself a 3-year Marshall Scholarship to spend my graduate study in Great Britain itself at King's College, Cambridge. And it was after those 3 years at Cambridge that I then went from being an honorary Brit to an honorary Midwesterner, because I got my very first pseudo job. It was kind of like an internship. I was the apprentice conductor of the Minnesota Orchestra, then led by its own Flying Dutchman music director, one Ado de Waart. And it was near the end of my first year of my apprenticeship with the Minnesota Orchestra that Ado de Waart called me into his office, and he said in that heavy Dutch accent, he said, "I see you have spent much time conducting the work of Benjamin Britten. Have you conducted the 4 C Interludes from Peter Grimes?" And without thinking, I reflexively said, "Of course, Meister, yes, of course I have." To which he said, "Good, you will conduct them in the subscription concerts next week." So I furiously ran home, with the help of, all-nighters with black coffee and ice packs. I relearned this score. I did conduct 3 performances of the 4 C Interludes from Peter Grimes, one of them being I'll never forget, I still shake up when I think of it, a live relay on Minnesota Public Radio. And because of that success, I then got to conduct my own production of Madame Butterfly at the Minnesota Opera, and then I got noticed by the La Crosse Symphony down the river, and here we are. So these 4 sea interludes, to put it mildly, have always meant a lot to me personally. Britten wrote the opera Peter Grimes, including the 4 sea interludes, during his famous sojourn in America. In 1939, Britten and Peter Pears left England for America. And it was there that actually Britten he had one of his most productive periods as a composer, because he left not only this amazing and sadly to this day underperformed violin concerto, several of his greatest song cycles, a great kind of symphony in one movement, which we should get to soon, his Sinfonia da Requiem, and then he began work on the opera Peter Grimes. He actually finished the work in London. By the middle of the Second World War, it should be said that Britten and Peter Pears had kind of realized that it was time for them to return. Being kind of sitting out the war in America was hurting their reputations, and they also just dearly missed their homeland of Great Britain. So they made a very dangerous North Atlantic crossing and returned to England, and it was there that Benjamin Britten finished his first grand opera, Peter Grimes. But it was a work with a profoundly American connection, because not only did he start it during his sojourn in America, but the whole opera owed its very existence to a commission from the legendary maestro of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the great Russian conductor Serge Koussevitzky, who, through his late wife, had a considerable fortune, which he turned into a foundation to support the work of young and fledgling composers, a foundation that exists to this very day. So it was Koussevitzky who commissioned from the young Benjamin Britten this opera, fittingly given Koussevitzky's Russian heritage, with many Russian overtones in its sound. I'll get to that a little later. The work had its official premiere in London in, I think it was the spring or summer of 1945, just as the operas and theaters, opera houses and theaters and concert halls of London were reopening at the end of World War II. The American performance occurred just a few months later, fittingly at Tanglewood, which to this day, of course, is the summer home of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, with its great instrumental programs and vocal programs for young artists as well. It was there that the American premiere was conducted not by Serge Koussevitzky, but by his brilliant young protege, an American composer and conductor named Leonard Bernstein. And the rest, on that note too, is history. With Peter Grimes, British audiences were very much expecting the young Benjamin Britten to write a very uplifting, lighthearted, kind of Merry England type of opera, kind of this, a kind of a pageant extolling the glories of England. What they got was something completely and totally different. And with Peter Grimes, Benjamin Britten did not only continue his to invigorate his reputation as being kind of a bad boy, a kind of a prodigal son of British music. With Peter Grimes, we can say he absolutely solidified it. It was a work that got a profoundly mixed reception in its premiere, but within a matter of years, it was justly recognized as one of the great operatic works of its time. Benjamin Britten actually completed the 4 sea interludes, as he called them, before the opera had its premiere. So before the world premiere of Peter Grimes, audiences got to hear these 4 sea interludes from the opera in concert form, which actually ended up being a very clever idea on Britten's part, because again, through these 4 musical pictures, this what is truly a kind of a program symphony in miniature. The whole work lasts about 17 minutes. Britten shows us through his masterly skill at orchestral tone painting that at the end of the day, the principal character of Peter Grimes is not Peter Grimes. It's not the woman he desperately falls in love with, poor Ellen Orford. No, it is the sea itself. The first of the four movements, called Dawn, is an incredible depiction of dawn on this sunrise on this lonely beach in this town on the Suffolk coast in southeastern England, which was actually literally very close to the town in which Britten himself grew up in. Britten grew up with the North Sea as this force in his life. You can literally see in the music, you can see in your mind's eye as you listen, the sun rising above the North Sea. You can hear the seagulls' wild cries, and you can hear in the distance this kind of ominous kind of tidal wave, this kind of tsunami brewing far off in the distance. The second movement, very fast and bright, is called Sunday Morning, where with the use of French horns, the whole brass section, and the chimes, the orchestral bells, Britten, in a manner that the great Russian opera composer Mussorgsky would have approved of, evokes the church service on a Sunday morning. You can hear the organ playing and the bells pealing, the chatter of the townsfolk, and then this second, more lyrical idea representing the humane voice of Ellen Orford herself, Ellen Orford and her pure understanding and love for the troubled Peter Grimes. The third movement, very slow, is called Moonlight, and here we can see Peter Grimes in his state of absolute loneliness, wandering on the seashore under a moonlit sky. The fourth movement, the finale of this little pocket program symphony, is called The Storm. And here Britten unleashes, musically speaking, the full force of the sea, not only as the sea and its kind of merciless violence, but also the, at times, merciless violence of not only Peter Grimes, but the townspeople themselves, who also don't come off as very attractive characters in this music drama. Near the end, there's one last glimpse, as if Peter Grimes is having one final remembrance of what could have been with the lovely Ellen Orford, but then all is suppressed in this, again, this musical tidal wave of this that comes out of the brass section, out of the low strings, into this full orchestral explosion. Whatever you might think of the whole opera itself, the four sea interludes of Peter Grimes represent Britten as a tone colorist at his very best, and for that reason, the music has long been deservedly popular with symphony orchestras. Here we have a rather recent performance by one of the great British conductors of our time, whose works in particular all over Europe with their greatest orchestras and opera houses. He actually went to my alma mater of King's College, Cambridge. Edward Gardner here conducts the BBC Symphony Orchestra in Benjamin Britten's 4 sea interludes from Peter Grimes.